So let's get to our wonderful panel today. Our first panelist is the head of Analyze performance practice. She speaks to clients daily and runs a number of weekly sessions speaking to HR leaders across many industries. So she really has a pulse on the brain-based methodology of performance management. Barbara Steele. Hi, Barbara, welcome.
Hi, Gabe.
Thanks for joining us. Our second subject matter expert is a brilliant new addition to Analyze client strategy team. He's been, in his words, on a one-man mission to obliterate traditional performance management from the face of the earth. Never one to mince words, and we're happy to support him in that goal, Rob Ollander-Krane. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Gabe, happy to be here.
Good to have you here today. And today's session will be facilitated by the guy that led the charge on killing performance ratings many years ago before it was fashionable to do so, our CEO and co-founder, Dr. David Rock. Hello, David.
Thanks, Gabe. Good to be here with you. Can you hear me okay? Coming through loud and clear?
Yep, sound great.
Well, excellent. Hi from back in the woods. Good to be here with you. And Rob, so delighted to have you join the team. I know we've collaborated on and off when you were at Gap for the last almost decade or so. Great to have you finally with us. Barbara, thanks for all the work you're doing. And everyone, thanks for joining us as we talk about what do we do with performance management now. This should be a great session. I'll just warn you up front, you're going to learn a lot from each other, as well as some insights from us. But we wanted to run this session as kind of an opportunity to see what's really happening out there. And so there's a few polls, so get your poll fingers ready. We'll do them pretty quickly so that we can sort of get to the data. But I think you'll find this really helpful to kind of level set what you could do, what you should do, what everyone else is doing, and also anchoring somewhat on the science. For those of you new to us, our vision as an organization is to actually make organizations more human through science. We did not write that this year. We wrote that 2 years ago. And wow, it's been a big year for us. Science is actually making a comeback. What a nice thing. People are respecting science, and humans are making a comeback. Companies are trying to value the human. So we've never been busier. The work we're doing is based on work we've developed for the last literally 22 years. And we're now advising over 50 of the Fortune 100, which has been really exciting. So, just to start with, as we think about performance management, we have to start with how are the humans? So we collected some data, 688 respondents. The cliff note is 49%, which is, let's call it half, noticed more or somewhat more difficulties focused on everyday tasks. That's similar to data we just saw out of California a couple of weeks ago before the fires, where 44% of people actually would be classified as having clinical levels of anxiety or depression. That's, again, nearly half. That was pre-fires. So the humans are not doing so well. So how we manage their performance in this time really needs to be thought through carefully. And that's what we're going to do today, kind of what's the right thing to do during this kind of crazy time. The architecture we're going to use, we're going to walk you through 6 conversations. And this is a framework we launched about 5 years ago now to just kind of help organizations think about performance management more deliberately. We realized that any kind of performance cycle is made up of 6 actual conversations, and each of these conversations have an intention and a frequency and an architecture and a goal, and often these things are very unstated. Companies have unclear, unstated intentions with each of these conversations. So we find it's really helpful to actually pull these 6 apart, think about them individually, follow the science of each one individually, because there is a good science for each of these. And then design just the right architecture. So we do a lot of consulting in that space and thinking about that. But what we want to do today is kind of pull these apart, and I'll hand to Rob in a moment to kick us off. But we want to pull these apart literally one at a time and share what we think should be happening and hear from you guys what you are doing with each of these as well. So it should be a lot of shared learning going on. So Rob, over to you. You want to take us through what's happening with goal setting? I'll go off camera and let you take the lead there. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, David. So a recent poll that NLI did on goal setting with 225 participants showed that 65% of organizations are adjusting their goal setting process. So something's happening out there in organizations due to the pandemic. It's changing the way organizations are thinking about goal setting. Interesting that only 16% are adjusting their annual reviews. So a big difference. So there's some energy around goal setting that's happening. There's another study out there as well that NLI did, and they found that 60% of employees have a clear understanding of how they can help support their organizations in this time of crisis. And although that's the good news, the disappointing news there is that 40% don't know how to help their organizations. And that's partially what goal setting is all about, is helping employees understand where they are and where they need to go. So in this sort of deeply disrupted world that we're in, with everything that's happening, with these statistics in mind, success can come when you review shorter term goals more often and focus on what's really important. I would guess for most organizations, the goals, the annual goals that each of you set as we turn the corner into this new year are no longer relevant. So much has happened. So much has happened in the world that has changed what we need to focus on. And because of the volatility that's out there, we need to focus on shorter term goals more often.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I know, Rob, you just published a piece recently. Maybe my team can put it in the chat. I know you just published a piece that folks can reference that digs a little bit further into this and kind of a number of the topics today as well. So congrats on getting a piece.
Anything coming up in the chat so far, David?
Yeah, we'll take a look. Lots of comments and folks kind of joining us. But please put anything you want in the chat, any sort of comments, questions, thoughts, insights as you go. We don't have a poll on this one, but any comments from folks about kind of what you're doing with goal setting, any questions coming up, just throw those in the chat. I think we've just put Rob's recent blog in there as well, performance management during the crisis. But the cliff note here is much more recent. Much more recent much more frequent goal setting and much shorter term. Maybe being serious about just monthly goals and letting the quarterly ones slide. Maybe be serious about letting the annuals slide. There's all sorts of ways to think about this at the moment. Is there any sort of big trend you're seeing out there, Rob?
Well, I think there's some confusion about what to do. I think people are thinking to make changes, but if I'm putting myself back in the practitioner world where I was before, in retail in particular, we were dealing with so much change. Like every day was a different situation. And just when we thought things were getting better, other things came down the pike to make us have to change our strategy. So
Right.
to ask people to think about longer term goals was ridiculous. So much
Right.
easier to just focus on what's happening right now. And I have to believe
Right.
that's happening in many companies.
Right. Although it's an interesting comment from Anne that because everyone's so sensitive to VUCA and to the changes, there's like one more change could tip the brain over. So a lot of firms are also saying, well, we're just going to leave it. Maybe we won't put as much focus on it. And I can see the sensibility to that of that. There's also, someone used the phrase, continuous performance management, and that is what we've been trying to help the market shift to for the last decade. This is a great opportunity to shift to continuous performance management. But I think that's a great segue actually to Barbara's piece next, because you can't have continuous anything without lots and lots of high quality feedback. So let's talk about that. Barbara, do you want to introduce the poll there?
Yeah, definitely. So everyone, this feedback conversation, as you all know, pardon me, has been one that's tricky in terms of how best to handle it. So first, we just want to check in and hear from you. Inside of your organizations, what changes have you made to the feedback process? Because in these disruptive times, we've seen this tension between, given all the high uncertainty, should we be focusing on feedback? Or given obviously the needs of the business, is it something that we still absolutely must do? And so Gabe, if we can get that poll running, that would be amazing. So we'd love to get your thoughts in terms of what have you been encouraging your leaders and employees to do inside of your organization? Do more, do less, avoid certain types? That's what we want to check in and hear from you on.
Barbara, I might need to come back to that one. We're having a little problem launching that poll, so I apologize. Let me work that on the background, and then maybe we can move on to the poll after. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries, and thanks for letting us know. So essentially, the interesting thing, coming back to the feedback conversation and whether or not we should have it, folks, isn't the real question whether or not we should be talking about giving unsolicited constructive feedback? Because let's face it, if we're talking about reinforcing feedback, that doesn't really cause threat or elevate threat in folks. It's when we're talking about unsolicited feedback. And that's really what we saw for our organization when we conducted research on this. So conventional wisdom says you put a lot of the emphasis on the giver providing the feedback, whereas really from a science perspective, it's more about the asking. And so David, I know that you were directly involved in this study when we led it. So I'm going to invite you to say a few more things about it.
I'm going to do a very crisp summary of this. I know we'll have an event coming up in the next few weeks on this, but we were asked by some large organizations to basically crack the code on building a feedback culture. Like what do you do differently to actually make feedback really take off in a company? And what we discovered is that the whole structure around giving feedback creates so much stress for giver and receiver. But when you shift to an asking for feedback model, it's significantly less stressful for both sides, roughly half as stressful from some biodata we collected. And so if you're already at a high baseline of stress, then creating a culture of asking for feedback is going to be much, much better than trying to give. So it's sort of even more relevant now that the culture really emphasizes asking for feedback. And the second thing is when you're asking, you can get it much more frequently. So it's a really important time to be kind of taking on this idea. We'll go back to the poll in a minute, but do you want to share some of the data that we collected in the last couple of years on this too?
Yeah, David, actually, most recently in our latest study, we surveyed roughly 450 individuals and asked them about the frequency of which they were having feedback conversations. And everybody, if you can really zoom in on that bottom line where you see the cadence of weekly or biweekly, on that top line, the green bar is how often are you having? And the bottom line, which is in blue, how often would you like to have? And so you can see this real clear disconnect, right? And this was in pre-pandemic times of folks feeling as though they weren't getting nearly as enough feedback as they felt was needed in order for them to perform effectively in their roles. And so in a deeply disrupted world, like we're talking about, and I also see these comments being made in the chat, which I love, just anchoring more heavily on asking really lowers the threat for both parties, and people can get the information that they need.
I know we did this last year. Barbara, do you remember the end? For some reason we left it off. Do you remember how many people were?
Yeah, I want to say, David, the end was something like 468.
Something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely north of 400.
Yeah,
That's a
north of
scientist
400.
speaking, researcher speaking. I think roughly 460.
Yeah.
That's great. We've got time for a couple of questions. So please throw your questions in the chat. We'll just we got a question for you first. We'll launch that poll.
Awesome.
I think we've got that working now. There we go. Beautiful. So if you'd be willing to just click one of those, what changes have you made to the feedback process? That would be great over this last 6 months or so.
Yeah, and I'll start tackling some of the questions here. So Cindy is asking, who did we survey? Love that question, Cindy. So in that 468 number that David is razzing me about, because I should know it exactly.
No, so, you do know it exactly. That's what
so we made the choice to actually survey everybody because we wanted to include in that survey individual contributors. So we surveyed all employees to really speak from their vantage point as employees. That's who's in that number. So it wasn't strictly managers, it wasn't strictly talent leaders. And yes, it was absolutely different industries.
Right. Many industries, and it was both employees and managers. It was a large study because we specifically actually asked different questions of employees and different questions of managers to see the difference. And I think this study, we've got some other data from that study. It was a big study last year.
Yeah, and I'm trying to see what else we can quickly answer, David. Okay. Amy, I see you've put in a lot there. I'm going to come back to your point. So Amanda's asking, who owns the asking? And we really appreciate this question, Amanda, because as we talk from a science perspective, as David has shared from that actual study, when you anchor on the asking, then it lowers the threat for both parties involved. What asking also does, rather than when you anchor on the giving, it puts more of the responsibility on the manager to be the one driving it. When you put it on anchoring, it opens it up, it empowers everyone. So really it gives the opportunity to an individual to ask for feedback specifically, more broadly, and as often as they feel is necessary.
Yeah. We actually we published 2 research papers on this. that are really significant. If you're already a corporate member, you'll be able to access those and also watch a wonderful session we did with Bob Keegan a few years back, kind of bringing this alive. But what we will do is put in the chat now a big piece that we wrote in Strategy and Business magazine about, oh, that's the wrong poll to put up, Gabe. A couple of years ago, we published a big piece on feedback in Strategy and Business that goes into feedback and kind of summarizes all our research in this. But essentially, if you can get everyone in the habit, especially managers, of asking for feedback, you suddenly get this huge burst in feedback that actually happens. So we'll put that in the chat in a moment, the feedback article.
And David, I think what Gabe showed, but it's gone away, but I believe what I saw in terms of the poll results is that folks were, oh, there it is, it's back. Thank you, Gabe. That more of those who've joined us today are encouraging more frequent feedback. And so what I'd love to know, folks, if you can drop in the chat. So what's your feeling about offering unsolicited, constructive feedback during this time? So is that something we should be doing, given the crisis times that we've been experiencing? So we would love to hear from you in terms of your thoughts about that. But thanks so much for participating in the poll.
Yeah, interesting data. So lots of people encouraging more frequent feedback, and 35% didn't change it, but 59% are encouraging it. With it's an interesting point. So we put, Kaylee's put the link in the chat there, worth a read. You can share that. It's got some interesting research. But the second study we did was actually collecting real bio data on feedback itself. All right, let's go on. We've got lots more to cover. So let's talk about check-ins.
Yeah.
You want to take this away, Barbara?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, David. So here, the check-in conversation, what we're showing you now is our research around, from a conventional wisdom standpoint, the check-in has really been more about the work, what the tasks are, what the process is, focusing on, how people are doing in terms of the work. Whereas from a science perspective, more, not to say that the focus on the results and outcomes, it's not as though that should go away, but expanding the focus and putting far more emphasis on the growth and the learning. That's what we see from a research and science perspective. And so want to hear from you folks when it comes to the check-in conversation, what's been happening inside of your organizations. And we have two questions that we'd love to hear from you on. So the first one is really around frequency of these check-ins, because we've been hearing a lot from talent leaders that during these disruptive times, the check-in conversation and its importance has really increased. So I want to find out from you, has that been the case inside of your organizations or not? So see all of you kind of responding. Thanks so much for that. So yeah, so have you seen an increase in more during these times, fewer, or about the same? Really curious to know.
Great. We'll give you another 10 seconds. Thanks for folks voting. If you can do that nice and quickly. We've got about 90 people so far. Let's get a bunch more in there. Get over 100. Yeah, really curious how that's kind of been looking. But we've got over half of folks, more frequent check-ins. So feel free to make some comments in the chat, but we'd love your click on the actual poll as well. All right, let's close that off. I think we're over 100, so let's see what the results is. 51% more frequent, only 10% fewer.
Yeah.
About a quarter stayed the same, and 13% unsure. So interesting. I mean, that's good to see. There's a second poll as well. Do you want to talk through this one, Barbara?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hear from you folks in terms of, still when it comes to the check-in conversation, have you noticed in terms of your leaders leading these, their ability to incorporate well-being as part of the discussion? So for talent leaders that David, Rob, and myself that we speak with on a regular basis, that's what they've been sharing with us, that they have seen more of, folks just checking in for the sake of seeing how they're doing, really dialing into that human aspect or element. So I want to know if that's been your experience inside of your organizations or if it's been something different.
And thanks everyone for clicking the poll quickly. Let's get a couple more and then we'll close it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. Let's close it off. And look at that, 75%.
There it is.
It's really, really good to see. I think
Yes.
it's such an important thing, and you know, it's relatedness, you know, is such an important thing. So I'll just walk through this, Barbara, with you. This is a study of 688 people. Again, so we're doing a lot more industry research. We've got Andrea Derla, heads up our industry research function, and we're doing a ton more in the last few years since she's joined us. But relatedness helps mitigate anxiety. And it's actually a whole lot of bio and neuro studies on this. Like if you're, you know, with a team of people and you're having to take pain, like putting your hand in you know, ice, you can literally hold your hand in longer if you're with people and you feel like people have your back. So it's not just a metaphor that you can kind of survive pain better if you're with a team or people who care about each other. But overall, people who felt that they were part of a team had much lower anxiety about that. So I think it's so important, as many of you are doing, 3/4, to check in on the human in a deeply disrupted world. Really care about people. It's such a critical thing going forward. I saw a data point from Just Capital that 89% of Americans think that this is a time for organizations to really pivot, to really change fundamentally, you know, how they think. And I think this, you know, putting humans first is such an important movement that's starting and hopefully will continue for decades.
Yeah. And
Thanks,
David, I just
Barbara.
want to quickly mention that's what we're seeing in the chat, that folks are saying far more emphasis on the well-being aspect, less about the performance. And someone else meant to be like feedback. And so we couldn't agree with you more, Bart, and thanks for that comment. Back to you, David.
Yeah, thanks. Rob, any other comments you want to add on the check-in, also feedback and check-in, anything you're observing in the chat or comments you want to add?
Well, the thing that I love is that people are doing more of them. I think that's a good recommendation regardless of whether we're in a COVID environment or not. This trend that's been going on for the last 10 years or so to move toward continuous feedback and talking more often certainly extends to the check-in. And people should be doing them whenever they need, not just because it's put on a calendar at some point.
Yeah, it's kind of like because we're more separated, we need to be more connected.
Definitely.
You know, and because we're feeling, you know, more distant, we need to be more human and more real with each other to balance those things out. It's really important. I'll give you 3 questions. This is what we use at NLI. Super easy, super powerful. When we have our leadership stand up every week, how are you really? And people can't not answer it. They have to answer it. You know, how are you really? How have you been winning? What do you need help with? That's it. How are you? How have you been winning? What do you need help with? Now you can't do that with 20 people, but you can do it in a stand-up with, you know, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Super helpful as a format, just 3 questions for kind of an ongoing check-in. More of a stand-up than a check-in, but still super helpful for a check-in because you're focusing on growth and learning and the positive and, you know, how you can help as well. Fantastic. Some great comments from people. Rob, take us through end of cycle. What are your insights and thoughts on this?
So our 4th conversation is end of cycle. And what we mean by that is kind of reviews that happen anytime during the year. It doesn't have to be just the year end. It could be quarterly. It could be even more frequent than that. And whether these are documented or not is irrelevant here. The conventional wisdom says to focus on outcomes. And I bet if you talk to any C-suite, they would say, yep, that's what we want people focused on. Did people achieve their goals or not? But what science tells us is slightly different. It says that we should, be focusing on outcomes. That's certainly important. But you also want to focus on what people are learning, what insights they're finding in the work that they're doing, either in their successes or their failures, and how they're applying that insight both to their future work and maybe to other people's work in the organization. Think growth mindset if you're familiar with that concept. So it's a little bit different. It's a little more holistic a discussion, not just outcomes. So in this incredibly disruptive world that we're in, you want to lift up from all the problems and the drama that are around us. There's so much going on, and really focus on the process that the employee is working through and the actions they're taking to achieve their goals. I love to think of this as an opportunity to be inspirational too, to talk about the vision of the work, the purpose of the work, and then what did the employee actually do to get there. And as we mentioned earlier in the goal setting discussion, you want to be focused, ruthlessly focused in this case, on what's important, not talking about every single thing that's out there.
So let's take a moment on that. Let's dig in. There's a couple of questions coming up. I think there's a couple of really interesting questions coming up about the end of cycle conversation. And again, think of end of cycle. It could be the end of a month where you've completed a goal. It could be the end of a project, or it could be the end of a quarter or the end of a year. But like, how do you kind of focus on, excuse me, wrapping things up? And there's an interesting question from Timothy, Rob, about, when you add key learnings, what happens versus just focusing on outcomes. You want to respond to that a little bit, and I'll add to it maybe?
Sure. So I know from my own experience that when someone tells me about what I did in the past, and in particular, if they focus on the things that didn't go so well, that's not very inspirational for me. It doesn't help me to feel good about the work that I did, nor give me guidance on what I should do differently. When someone instead focuses on, well, what did you learn? What worked and what didn't? And how can you apply that to the learning? And gives me the autonomy to make a choice about what I want to do next. I'm engaged, I'm motivated, I'm more inclined to walk away from that conversation feeling like it was productive and helpful to me.
Yeah, definitely. From a science perspective, what we're doing is activating a growth mindset. I mean, as soon as you say, tell me what you delivered, you're activating people trying to prove their value, right? And they won't really tell you about what they learned or how they could get better. They're going to try and prove that they delivered something. They're going to try to look good, right? So if you say, tell me, did you deliver on this goal of 25 widgets? Okay, I'm going to tell you all about how I did that. I want to prove that I performed well, right? But what happens is when you focus on prove, you nudge out improve. They don't want to tell you anything about how they might get better in the future, because that's like not going to help with proving, right? Whereas when you say, hey, how did you do? But tell me what you learned in this month that helped you get there. Like, what new habits did you build that helped you win? And maybe what new habits do you think you need to build going forward? Now you're anchoring people on improve, not on prove. And you're anchoring not on like looking good, but on getting better, right? And that's that prove and improve, the prove and look good, right? Versus improve and get better. And as soon as you're nudging people in any way towards improve and get better, you're activating more of a growth mindset. And we've got tons of research on that. Maybe my team can find a couple of the pieces we've written on growth mindset in performance management. We've probably got a dozen or so.
Yeah, David, I was going to mention one, Andrea and I did, transforming performance with the growth mindset. And it's exactly speaking to what you're mentioning. And so for those individuals who operated with a growth mindset, they were far more receptive to receiving the feedback, as well as very much willing to actually learn. And when they were given feedback about end of cycle work, when they had a growth mindset, they viewed it as an opportunity as opposed to thinking of it as in some way that they failed.
Right. It's just literally focusing people on getting better as opposed to proving. It's really, really important. We've written a lot on this. We've written a foundational research paper on organizational growth mindset. We wrote a piece literally on growth mindset as it relates to performance management. We've done about 3 big industry research studies on performance management. Separately, 3 or 4 on growth mindset. If you're a corporate member, you'll find just tons and tons of resources, all these papers and videos and lots of others in these in that performance management space. So it's a really big piece of it. But I think fundamentally shifting to a growth mindset literally makes people work harder. They learn faster. They're more adaptive. They handle stress better. So there's lots of good evidence on that just that shift, really makes a big difference. A couple of other questions, and Rob or Barbara, anything you want to jump into? I'll just answer one quickly. We are absolutely offering the coaching certificate. In fact, we've gone 100% virtual months back, and there's roughly 1 a month starting. It's incredibly popular. We used to run brain-based coaching years ago, maybe 10 years ago. We used to run it fully online, and we stopped, but we had all the processes, so we went back to fully virtual, and it's been incredibly popular. So you can there are programs pretty much in every time zone around the world. Roughly once a month, you can start those. So those are available. Rob, Barbara, anything else you want to answer on the...
Yeah, I want to toss one to Rob. Rob, because there's this question of feedback conversations. Are they compromised at all when we have them virtually?
I think that depends on how comfortable you are with this technology and the sort of sterile feeling that you get when you're only looking at a screen. I think anyone can learn to have a conversation this way. In fact, I find this to be a slightly more intimate setting. I pay more attention because I've got someone's face like right in front of me, and that makes it harder for me to get distracted. I'm right there, especially if I turn off all the other technology that's around me. So I actually think that it can produce better conversations because it feels much more intimate to me than coming into someone's office where there's other distractions, where other people could come in the room. It's really just about me in that moment. I'm kind of geeking out on it personally.
And we're also beaming straight into people's home office, right? Or home, seeing their families and their dogs and their kids and their pets, all this stuff. It's a weird time. They're all just more disconnected, but actually much more intimate in many ways, much more, real and connected with people. So I think it's a time you can have much more honest, real conversations, human to human. But just one thing, and I like Rob's comment there, you've just got to sort of get used to the tech. Make sure you can see, they can see you clearly, got good lighting, good sound. Just, get comfortable with whatever platform you're using. So you're not using a big chunk of working memory on how do I see people, where does it work? Just try to make more sort of intuitive and automatic the actual tech side of it so that you can focus on the human to human contact. That's great. We probably should
a real
go
obvious thing. Yeah, I was going to say real obvious thing is just making sure everybody's on camera for facilitating that human connectedness. So.
Yeah. I mean, one more quick comment. It's an interesting one, managing performance virtually. I mean, the big thing here with managing performance virtually is in the absence of social cues, generally in any situation, the absence of social cues makes people assume the worst. So if you don't know someone's face, are they smiling, are they growling, like how are they feeling when someone gives you a message, you literally automatically assume that they're angry at you. The brain just does that as a kind of default. And right now everyone's craving social cues, right? So the smart manager is going to get on camera with their team member every week and just say hello and wave and say, how are you? And you're doing great. I'm here for you. Everything's great. And that's managing performance 101. Just giving people social cues, encouragement. We need lots of positive feedback, all of that. So it's not so much managing performance during COVID, it's kind of nurturing and encouraging and supporting people is the way managers should think about performance right now. And all of that. And yes, to Andrew's comment, you can hear social cues in people's voice. You can hear warmth. You can hear authentic caring, especially if you know someone well, you know their voice. You can hear the person's really caring just in a phone conversation as well. So right now, I think it's not just a virtual world, it's a world where people are, anxious and on edge. And starving for social cues. So in that world, the tip is get on camera regularly, express real empathy, and do everything you can to connect human to human, even if you want to keep that, that really separate. Let's go to a couple of the closing ones and then we'll leave time for other questions. Let's get to the next one on compensation. So Rob, I think you're taking this?
Yeah, this one's mine. So of all the topics that surround performance management, I think compensation is probably the one that's either most difficult or ruffles the most feathers. In the conversations that I've had with many companies over the last few years, every time I talk about innovations in performance management, this is the place where there's the most energy, the most angst, the most questions. And there were a couple questions earlier in the chat about, so what do you do at the end of the year? How do you manage this process of providing compensation or reward given everything that's going on in the world? So conventional wisdom would tell that, that managers should just basically say, this is what you're getting. This is your merit, this is your bonus, and you're done. Science, on the other hand, it adds a lot more to this conversation. And I certainly, in my own experience at Gap and what we designed there, said this is absolutely the way to go. You want to help employees understand the process. In fact, help HR understand the process for how merit and bonus are funded and how they're allocated, because most people don't know. And when you don't know how it's done, it feels unfair if you don't get what you were expecting. You want to include in that conversation more than just the details of the package, but recognize the things that the employee did well, where they're learning, where they're growing, what their next opportunities or challenges might be. And then, of course, give them the actual reward. But like we were saying earlier about talking about the future, about where you can grow, engage, draw the discussion toward what happens tomorrow or the next month or the next year, so the employee has the motivation to move forward instead of only looking in the rear view mirror. I'll add one more interesting piece of science on here. There was a Harvard Business Review article that talked about whether employees liked being compared to other employees in terms of compensation. So think ratings. Did I get the A or the B versus the C compared to what someone else got? Or whether I liked being compared just to my own performance. And not a surprise, employees would much prefer to be compared just to their own performance before. So again, think growth mindset here. It's about me getting better, not about me comparing my performance to someone else.
It's great. We've got a poll and there's a lot of great questions coming in. Let's ask you a question first, and then we'll take some of your questions. You want to walk us through this, Rob?
Sure. So the poll is asking, what changes are going on in your organization right now with regards to year-end rewards? Are no changes being made? They're exactly the same as before. Are you going to spread reward evenly across all employees, sort of taking the differentiation out? Are you only rewarding top employees, maybe because business has been tough and there's not a lot of money to go around? Are you shifting the focus from individual to team performance? Certainly in this year more than any, it sort of takes a village.
Oops.
Oh. And are you making no changes to the annual process? So we've got about 70 people responding out of 187, so 39%. Let's see if a few more come in here. I'm seeing, for the most part, no changes being made, which is interesting because the world is so different in 2020 than it's ever been before. But about 62% so far saying that no changes are being made. We have about 94. Let's get over 100, and then we can stop this poll and talk a little bit about it. Almost there. Just a few more of you. Oh, two more, one more, and there we are. Let's go ahead and stop the poll there with 61% saying no changes will be made. And 21% they'll say there'll be no monetary reward offered this year. So that's probably a difference from previous years. So what's going on in the world is disrupting rewards here. So
interesting, yeah.
In this crazy world, I think there are a couple of things you can do. David pointed to an article that I wrote, and I spent a lot of time talking about what's going on with rewards and what's going on in particular in this year, because it's just not the same thing we're used to. One interesting thing that I'm seeing in companies, and in particular in the company that I used to work for, The Gap, is incredible innovation, which was sort of surprising to me. With all the threats that are out there, you would think that innovation wouldn't be happening. But we saw incredible innovation in our product manufacturing. So when the designer and the merchant and the inventory management and production people would come together, there was this magic moment where they were all in a room looking at a sample on a human being, like looking how it draped, looking at the colors, pulling the waistline in to make it a little bit different, adjusting the lengths of the sleeves or the pant leg. It was a human process that was all happening in a room together. And then COVID hits. And we have to figure out a way to change this process to make it virtual. Now, if you had asked anyone in my company in 2019, could we ever do something like that? Would we ever consider doing anything like that? They would have absolutely said no. They would have said, you're crazy, you can't do that. And yet in this year, because of what's happening, all these sacred cows, all these old problems and new problems that are coming up because we're working remotely had to be solved. So teams are being incredibly innovative this year from my perspective. And I really think we need to reward that. So for those of you who are trying to figure out, well, where should we focus our particular bonus to, I think you reward teams, and in particular teams that have been incredibly innovative in this year. Now,
that's a good point. The research supports that, yeah. Rewarding teams is really important because it creates team. You know, it creates a commitment to teams as well. It's really big, yeah. We've written on that.
Great.
And oh, sorry, Rob, go ahead, finish your thought.
I'll add one more point here. Because so many people are working remotely, because we're not in an office, and working remotely means you're dealing with the other things that are going on in your environment. So that could mean children who are homeschooling and having to figure out the technology and keep them tucked in, or a spouse who's also working side by side with you. So who can talk quietly so that the other person can get their work done? Or do you have to go in separate rooms? We're managing so many things, not to mention our concerns about the health of everybody in our home. it's no longer an even playing field. It's not. If you got the A, the B, the C, then you get the pass. And if you're failing and you're going to be on corrective action anyway, you get the fail.
Okay, Rob, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now. It looked like
Okay, I think we may have froze a little bit.
Yeah, just a heads up, Barbara, that it froze for everybody.
Okay.
So I think everyone just had the same exact experience. So
I think we're back up though. Yeah, I think we're back up. There's some good questions come in I want to take. So
yeah, I wanted to tackle one of them, David.
Yeah, do it.
You might, I think you were just going there. So one of the things we're hearing, which is a really important point in this topic of around compensation, is separating the performance conversation from the rewards conversation. And so we talk about that from an NLI perspective, our point of view, because when you factor in cognition, so from a brain capacity standpoint, we create cognitive overload for folks when we try to have that year-end discussion that really encompasses everything, because we essentially are giving a review of how the person performed throughout the cycle. We are providing them with feedback. Then we're asking them to lift up and control and think more visionary about what they see their future being inside of the organization. And we also talk to them about their pay. And we probably lost them after the feedback, right? Because of threats. So, so just from a cognition standpoint, it's too much. And so that's why our point of view, and some of you are raising this in the chat, is really separate the two. It absolutely helps the experience from a threat level perspective, so that the individual has the ability to manage that threat level and stay with you, right? Stay with that leader in the conversation and be focused really on just the performance part of the conversation, and then subsequently at a later time have that rewards discussion.
And Rob, are you seeing any data, or Barbara, you seeing any data on how far apart these should be? I know we saw some data a few years ago. I haven't seen anything for a couple of years, but how far apart do you think these need to be?
Yeah, Rob, did you want to talk about GAP for a second?
I can't speak to any data, but I'll say that I think what makes these conversations so difficult, so I think it's less about the timing, although it is great to separate them. What's making these conversations so difficult is that many employees go into that year-end conversation not knowing what's going to happen. It would be beautiful if every employee walked in already knowing about their performance, what they're doing well, where they're getting stuck, what they should be working on, had a general sense of whether they were successful, like have they achieved their goals? So they walk into that conversation thinking, this is probably what I'm going to get, whether it's a rating or just the conversation and the compensation that goes along with it. When you walk into that conversation, it's not as threatening and you can hear more. But what's happening is they're not getting that all year long. So I think the conversations that happen before that are important. I can't speak to their cadence, just that they have to happen in order to make that year-end conversation easier and even shorter.
Right. The comp should be relatively quick. The comp conversation, the sort of should be relatively quick. How far apart? I was hearing a month apart at least previously. Do we have any sort of sense of how far apart the performance versus comp?
Yeah, David, I haven't seen anything published lately about it, but that's what we were seeing before, roughly a month, no longer than 6 weeks in terms of the distance between the two.
Right. Okay. So for us at Gap, it depended on where you worked in the organization. If you were in a headquarters locations, we said a month, and that made sense for office workers. But in our stores, you can't wait that long to have conversations about performance with people on the sales floor, and you don't have the luxury of pulling them off the floor for an hour once a month. So we tried to create an environment where we were giving this kind of feedback all the time. So I think it depends on the work environment.
That's great. One more quick thing, and then I want to get to the last two polls and wrap up on time. But Rob, with the freeze was on like a really important moment. You were in full flight around pass fail. Can you just give people the cliff note?
Sure, let me go back to that. I don't know where it cut off. So in this year where there isn't parity with people working from home, where some people are dealing with parents, with children, with spouses, and all of the chaos and all of the fear of potentially getting sick, it's just not a level playing field. So I recommend that the people who are looking at compensation look at pass-fail, not did I get the A, the B, or the C grade. If you were going to get the A, the B, or the C, then that's a pass. And if you were headed for corrective action, if you were going to get the F or the failing grade, you fail. And then everyone feels good, and it takes some of that differentiation between what's going on in your home life out of the equation.
Right. And that's like the 2, 3, or 4% fail we're talking about, like the serious underperformance, right? So with people who should be on a performance improvement plan. So we're talking about the few percentage of people that maybe is a fail. Otherwise, you know, this is a year to give people a pass. You have people operating at 150% capacity because they're not traveling, and then you have people at 50% capacity or 10% capacity because they're super, you know, struggling. And I think there's no way, you know, to really work around that and sort of except get the, you know, the effective people to help the people who are challenged by, you know, lack of home care or whatever, sort of create these internal markets of sort of supporting each other is fantastic. It's intrinsically rewarding to help people, but otherwise there's not much you can do. Let's get to career.
Yes, David, I knew you were going to say this.
Yeah.
I have one quick thing I want to say before we leave
Sure.
compensation, because it's come up in the chat. The person's asking, you know, since we're talking about separating these conversations, when it comes to communicating the reward, can we just send a letter and have it, or just have it show up in their paycheck? And what we would say to that is, while we're suggesting clearly to separate the two based on cognitive capacity, like we've spoken of, and that the conversation should be a lot shorter, when we reduce it to an email, then it becomes transactional. So we don't want to lose the human element, because there's the communication of the reward, but then there's another piece that's tied to it around procedural justice. And so if people really want to understand philosophically something about the pay process, the pay system, you want to allow the space for that to happen. And that wouldn't take place in an email. So we would still say, have that conversation because it needs to happen for that human element.
Yeah, this is not a time to take out the human. This is a time to add the human in. Absolutely. Speaking of which, let's think bigger picture, long term. We just want to move through this. So I might do this a bit quicker. So the career poll. So this is the final of the 6 conversations. So what have you done to encourage career conversations? Have you not at all, quite a bit, somewhat, not sure? Where are you on career conversations, the bigger conversations? Just grab a quick bit of data on this. Let's get some answers in. We've got about 70. Let's get a couple more. Have you encouraged, or how have you encouraged career conversations? Let's give you another moment to click that one. All right, and then just a couple more. Not at all, quite a bit, somewhat, not sure. Let's get a couple more of you so we can get over 100. All right, very good. We can close that off.
There. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Interesting. Now what we have is 50%, somewhat, 28%, about a quarter, quite a bit. 15%, not at all right now. So that's, you know, interesting.
It is.
So they're still very much alive and well. And then the bigger picture question, will you be continuing to work on succession planning and talent planning this year? It's the final poll of the day. Will you be continuing to work on succession planning and talent planning this year? So just a yes, no, or don't know.
Yeah, a lot coming in under yes.
Yeah, like seeing that.
Yeah, lots of people. I mean, I think people don't want to feel like that has gone. That's really important. All right, let's close that poll off. Thanks very much. It's a big yes. So career, take us away.
Yeah, so really the quick and the dirty is, we know from a conventional wisdom standpoint, it's about, you know, this once a year event, versus research and science really tells us that this needs to feel more like a partnership where there's an opportunity to really provide coaching and guidance to an individual about where they want to go in terms of their professional development, and that leader manager being that coach to really help them with that process. So it's conversations taking place. And when you look at the research that we did, pretty similar in terms of the trend that we saw with the feedback, and David, this is on the next slide. what that 468, those individuals said to us specifically about career conversations is that they really were practically non-existent. And so that's what we saw, you know, pre-pandemic. So one of the questions we know that when it comes to these disruptive times, individuals will be reflecting on, you know, how was I treated by my employer? And when we're in this better normal and the economy is a lot stronger, is this a place I want to stick around and stay with? And when you look at career conversations from an employee standpoint, arguably, it's probably the most conversation for them because it's about an investment in them and how they're viewed and they're feeling valued as part of the organization. And so would love to hear from you all. You know, it looks like many of you have said that inside of your organizations, you are having these career conversations. And so we'll love to hear from you about, you know, if they're not prioritized, particularly in these disruptive times, what are the implications? Because we're thinking if employees are feeling like, right, when there's so much uncertainty in these times and they're not really sure, you know, given all the change that's happening inside of an organization, what does this mean for them? What does this mean for their future? So they really need to be having these conversations with their leaders.
That's great. Any quick comments on career and what you're seeing in your firm? We've got a minute or two. Any comments in the chat you'd like to make about career in particular, what's going on for you? And I'll put up the visual of the 6 conversations as well, so you folks can see that who didn't see that earlier.
Awesome, David. Just letting you know, nothing yet from folks about career, but hopefully that's coming.
All right, well, let's bring it together. So what we believe as you're thinking about performance, firstly, we believe it's helpful to think about them as conversations, right? And we think these are the 6 critical conversations. Lots of people carve it up differently. We think this is really helpful. It's stood the test of time in our consulting practice for about 5 years. We've helped many, many firms rethink. And what you can do now is individually think about what's our philosophy, what does great look like? Let's build a fantastic, you know, 1-page guide for each of these. You can really build a clear architecture for these if you kind of divide these into 6. So what we've walked through today is kind of collecting some data on the 6, getting a sense of where you are. At our summit coming up in November 10th to 12th, we're going to report out a lot more on performance. We've got a big session. We'll be sharing out more research and some of this summary data as well. So I encourage you to check into that. Before we get to the close, we've just put a poll up. Just to let you know, so you know, before you jump off, if you need to jump to your next thing, it'd be great to click something on that poll. It just helps us know about kind of what you're thinking about. So a performance management executive briefing, we're able to come in and deliver to your leadership team kind of how to think about performance management in this era, a little bit along the lines of this. Improved, connect, differentiate, and develop are 4 of our performance management off-the-shelf habit activation solutions. So with Improve, you can literally get 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, 500,000 people asking for feedback better in 30 days, all at the same time. Connect is the neuroscience of quality conversations. So Connect is more broadly, all the different conversations will be impacted by that. Differentiate is end of cycle and comp, and develop is career conversations. So across Improve, Connect, Differentiate, Develop, each one of these is 30 days, you can actually transform the performance conversation. So, click any of those if you want someone to follow up and kind of share a little bit more about those. And we also have a very big practice in diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a typo on that poll somewhere, but diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've got a huge practice in that, and that's super relevant and connected to performance as well. So obviously we need to take the bias out of all parts of the performance cycle, from goal setting all the way through to comp and career. So we've got some strong thoughts on how to make sure that bias is not in this process as well. So click any of those before you jump off. A couple of quick announcements. One of them you may be curious about. We are hiring. We are having our busiest 6 months so far ever. So if you're interested in helping make organizations better for humans through science, now's a great time to check in with us. Just go to our careers page, go to neuroleadership.com, go to careers. We've got lots of open roles. If you're from an active client with us, we can't really hire you. but have a look there. So all sorts of levels, all sorts of places, and there's other opportunities than just listed there as well. So we are growing. Big announcement on the summit. Can someone put the link in? The summit has been launched. It's been announced. It's our best yet. Just like we were saying about more intimate, it's going to be an incredibly intimate, incredibly rich and powerful experience over 3 days and around the clock, believe it or not, for people in EMEA and APAC to also experience the summit. So it's a 3-day kind of idea-a-thon around the world on how to build a better normal. And we'll definitely have a big piece on performance. There's lots on diversity, equity, and inclusion and how to really think about that. Lots on just, change. It's going to be our best summit yet. So fully virtual. It's normally about $3,000 to attend. This year it's under 500. And you can obviously be, at any part of that. So I encourage you to check that out. And there's information there. Just finally, a big thank you to Rob for your hard work behind the scenes and joining the team, and Barbara, your incredible steerage of this practice and pulling this together, both of you, the last few weeks. Thanks for joining us, Rob. Welcome to the team. Everyone out there, the cliff note: manage the humans, follow the science. Care about the humans, not manage them. Care about the humans, follow the science.
You're
That's
here.
what it is, I think, on performance. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Look after each other. Keep delivering what matters. We'll see you next week. Gabe,
Thanks,
back
all.
to you.
Bye now.